Our cover story this week is about Bangladesh. Now, Bangladesh is the world's 7th most populous country. It has the 4th largest Muslim population in the world. Bangladesh has a booming textile and garment manufacturing industry. Chances are that the branded shirt or dress you're wearing now was made in Bangladesh. But that's not the reason why we are featuring Bangladesh this week. Bangladesh is in the news because of protests sweeping the country. Protesters, mostly students, are calling for reform of a quota system that reserves more than half of highly sought-after government jobs for descendants of veterans of the 1971 War of Independence, women and backward areas. In South Asia, it's called quota or reservation. In some other parts of the world, it is known as equal opportunity, affirmative action, or positive discrimination. Now, the protests are ongoing. Police fired rubber bullets, hurled sound grenades, and lobbed tear gas canisters to scatter protesters who blocked railway tracks and major roads. French news agency AFP reported that the death toll had risen to 105. But some other news agencies cited a lower number of deaths.
At least 19 people have been killed in the protest in Bangladesh. 13 of them died on 18th July, which saw the highest death toll in a single day so far. Protesters are demanding that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government ends a 30% quota for the families of people who fought in the 1971 War of Independence from Pakistan. Since 14 July, her party supporters have gathered and confronted the demonstrators who had blocked major thoroughfares in Dhaka. On 16 July, armed cadre of Bangladesh's ruling Awami League party, along with its student wing, took to the streets of Dhaka to counter the protesters. Brandishing sticks, bats, helmets and even handguns, the cadre labelled the protesters as traitors, while confrontations occurred in multiple locations in capital Dhaka and elsewhere in the country. Not all the dead were students. A bus driver and a rickshaw puller were among the dead. The bus driver was brought to a hospital with a bullet wound to his chest. Protest intensified after Prime Minister refused to meet the students' demands, citing ongoing court proceedings. The protests are the first significant challenge to Prime Minister Hasina's government since she won a 4th straight term in an election held in January that was boycotted by the main opposition.
All right, I want you, the viewer, to understand the issues at hand better. Take a look at Bangladesh's reservation policy over the years. Now, we start in 1972 when Bangladesh started its reservation policy just 1 year after its independence in 1971. 80% seats were reserved for certain categories, 20% were to be filled on merit. Now, those 80% comprise 30% seats for freedom fighters, 10% for war-affected women, and 40% for people from backward districts or backward areas. In 1976, the government decided to bring down the reservation from 80 to 60%. How? By reducing the number of percentage of quota for backward districts from 40 to 20%. So 60% reserved, 40% to be filled on merit. In 1985, the government further reduced reservation from 60% to 55%. And how did they do it? By bringing 3 changes. One, the 10% reservation for war-affected women was extended to include all women, not just war-affected women. The quota for backward districts was reduced further from 20% to 10%. And a new 5% quota was started for indigenous communities or ethnic minorities. So 55% reserved, 45% on merit. Then two things happened. In 1997, children of freedom fighters were brought under the ambit of reservation. And in 2010, grandchildren of those veterans were also given the benefit of reservation. And last but not the least, in 2012, the reservation was increased marginally to 56%. How? By introducing a 1% quota for persons with disabilities. That's how things look even today as we speak. Now, what you all should know is that anti-quota protests are not new to Bangladesh. They've taken place in the past as well. For example, in 2018, like now they're happening now in 2024. But here, then, like now, the protests started in the Shahbag area of Dhaka before spreading to other areas of the country. First, take a look at what happened in 2018, and then we'll talk about 2024. In January 18, a petition was filed in the Dhaka High Court seeking re-evaluation of quota policy. In March that year, Dhaka High Court rejected the petition. Protests broke out in April that year, and in October, the government abolished or scrapped the quota for families of freedom fighters. Now, coming to 2024, on 5th June this year, the Dhaka High Court ruled that the 2018 decision taken by the government to abolish the quota was illegal and reinstated the quota. Subsequently, the government moved the country's stop court against the High Court ruling. On 1st July, protests broke out. And on the 4th of July, the Bangladesh Supreme Court upheld the High Court ruling. On the 11th, the Supreme Court suspended the High Court ruling pending a hearing on the government's appeal on 7th August. Now, not one to give in easily, Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina had a word or two for the protesters. A combative Hasina had this to say to the protesters. Here's the exact quote. Why do they have so much resentment against the freedom fighters? If the grandchildren of freedom fighters don't get quota benefits, should the grandchildren of Razakars get the benefit? Not to be outdone, the protesting students retorted by raising these slogans. Quota na medha, 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 meaning not quota but talent, talent, talent. Also, chaite gelam odhikar, hoy gelam Razakar, meaning I went asking for my rights but was branded a Razakar. Now, Razakar is a Persian word meaning volunteer, but in Bangladesh it's a pejorative term that stands for traitor. It's used for those accused of collaborating with Pakistan's army in 1971 to betray the country. The Razakar was a paramilitary force formed by Pakistan to commit war crimes including massacring civilians, looting and rape. The Bangladesh government brands all collaborators of Pakistani forces as Razakar. Now the question is, are there strong, compelling arguments for and against quotas in Bangladesh? The short answer is yes. The Dhaka High Court said, and I quote, "The freedom fighters are pride of our nation. Thus, we are of the view that during the period of August 1575 to 1996, the freedom fighters, their children and grandchildren have been suffering socially, economically and politically, which makes them one of the most backward sections of the citizen of this country," unquote. There are compelling arguments we've made against quotas too. First of all, protesters argue that a problem arises when freedom fighters, quota holders use it multiple times. First, at the time of university admission, and second, when applying for coveted government jobs. And second of all, Bangladesh is facing high youth unemployment. That, coupled with stagnant job growth in private sector, makes a government job with a regular source of income that much more desirable to the youths. Now, college libraries are filled with young graduates cramming for the civil service examination, vying for scarce government jobs that promise job security, good income and prestige. In last year's recruitment test, some 346,000 candidates competed for just 3,000 300 jobs. Young people make up more than a quarter of the country's population. Now picture this. 32 million people in the country out of a population of 170 million are not in work or education. That is, 1 in every 5 Bangladeshi between 15 and 24 years of old is either out of work or education or both. This according to official statistics from 2023. Now, university graduates face higher rates of unemployment than their less educated peers. About 650,000 graduates are among the more than 2 million young people entering the job market every year. That's not all. Blue-collar jobs are also harder to come by. Textile and garment sectors are Bangladesh's biggest employers. Exports have jumped fourfold to $40 billion since 2008, but employment across private sector jobs has stagnated. Now, Bangladesh's economy, once among the world's fastest growing, has stagnated. Inflation hovers around 10% and dollar reserves are shrinking by the day. Now, are quotas unique to Bangladesh? Certainly not. There are many examples from the global south of countries reserving a certain percentage of education and jobs. India, for instance, has 59.5% reservation. Nepal has 45% reservation. South Africa has an Employment Equity Act to promote diversity and equality in the workplace. It applies to companies employing more than 50 people. So to conclude, there are no easy answers to the vexed problem. So, should merit be sacrificed at the altar of positive discrimination? Or is a level playing field must for the sake of equality and equal opportunity? What do you think? Let us know. The question we are asking is this: are Bangladesh anti-quota protests justified? Yes or no? I repeat, are Bangladesh anti-quota protests justified? Yes or no? You can post your replies on our social media handles at Facebook, X, and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you.